Hi, I'm Chris Cahoon.
I'm Chris Ashworth.
And we're going to talk about audio routing in QLab today.
Welcome to QLab TV.
Welcome to QLab TV. So the first thing that I want to talk about is how does audio get from...
I'm going to stop you for a second.
Okay.
Are you watching the monitor?
I don't think so.
Oh, I thought you were looking down.
I was staring into the distance.
Into the distance.
Hi, welcome to QLab TV. I was looking at the monitor.
I thought you might be.
Do you want to start the intro this time?
Sure. Hi, I'm Chris.
And I'm also Chris.
And this is QLab TV.
Today I want to talk about audio routing. I want to know how sound gets from a file on my computer out to the speakers. Can you show me?
I would be so delighted to show you.
Fantastic. I have set up 4 queues, all of which I think can use audio. The audio queue, the mic queue, the camera queue, and a video queue.
Right. And the basic principles that we'll talk about will apply to all of these. So we'll dig in on one of them, but the same ideas apply to all of them.
Good.
So since it's probably the most basic, we can start with the audio queue, do you think?
Perfect.
Just for the audio file. So this is taking audio out of a file and playing it to a speaker. And we'll walk through all of the steps that the audio takes on the route from the file to the speaker. So we just understand every point that a volume might change, where the audio is going, where it gets routed, and all those sorts of things.
Fantastic.
So
where do I go first?
First, we've got the audio queue selected. We're looking at the basics tab now, so we can see what file we're looking at, this nice applause file, but we want to click over to the levels tab.
All right.
And this is the key place to adjust volume and routing for an individual cue.
Great.
The way to visually trace through where the audio starts is if this is a 2-channel file. I can see that because down here on the inputs it lists 1, 2 channels. And those represent the file channels, what's coming off of the SSD drive, the left and right. We could even name them left and right if we would like.
Oh. Maybe I will.
Yeah.
I do that by clicking this
press the
inputs
inputs.
button.
Sure. We can name these whatever we want. It's on a queue by queue basis, so if this had a lot of channels in it. Do you remember how many channels do we support for files?
I think it might be 24.
Yep. 24. So you can have up to 24. We've named this one left and right because it just has 2. And so this is where the audio starts. We can set the gain of the input channel here next to the inputs. And gain in QLab and in many other audio programs is specified in decibels, which is a measurement of how much the audio should change from where it's at. So 0 means no change. Whatever the file is at, play it at that full volume.
Okay.
A negative number means play it softer, and a positive number means play it louder. Because negative numbers are so much more common than positive, usually you're pulling it down from full. QLab doesn't require you to enter the minus sign ahead of time.
Oh.
If you just press in if you press in 10, for example, it'll assume you meant negative, which is good for saving your ears and your speakers in case you really want to be sure that you mean make it louder.
I see.
So if you want to make it louder, you have to put that plus sign in first.
So if I have 2 different audio queues with different audio files and they are both set to 0, if one of the files is significantly louder than the other, I would probably come in here first to make it so that their volumes were about the same, or... Yeah, most likely, and probably with the main volume, because probably the file has been mastered in such a way that the channels are all relatively the correct sound. So usually you'd leave those at 0, just like whatever the file says is the right volume, it is, and the main volume is what you'd often tweak as your starting point for different files relative to each other. I see. Thanks.
You're so welcome. Next up in the signal flow is from once we pull the audio out of the channels of the file. Now we route it to what are called the Q outputs. And the Q outputs is this top row of sliders, currently 1 to 12. It can be as many as 64. Right now we're just looking at 12, but we can tell it, hey, I want to see all of them. If you have a whole ton of speakers at your disposal, this might be one output per speaker, for example. It might not be because of later routing, but by default, you might imagine it as that. Now we're showing only 2 because maybe we only have 2 speakers. And in order to tell QLab where you want the audio from the channels of the file to go, we route it at the crosspoints. And so here we can read this as saying that the left channel, all of the sound from the left channel is routed to Q output 1. You see that 0 there, that means play the full volume of the file from this channel out Q output 1, and all of the volume of the right channel is played to Q output 2 because of the 0. We could reduce that just the same as the others. If we enter negative decibels, we can lower the amount of that channel that's going to that output. Or if we wanted to route it to different outputs, we could do it at different crosspoints. So the gentleman shall decide how he wants to route.
When I first started using this, I was very confused by the zeros. And the way that I remembered what it does is that it's saying there are 0 changes. It's sending the value from the left channel into channel 1 with no changes to the gain.
Yeah, I like that.
Probably not super accurate for people that are into audio land, but it helped me remember that the 0 doesn't mean nothing. It means don't change it.
Yeah.
And blank means don't send anything.
Yeah, right. A blank is there's no audio happening here.
Yes.
This is fully silent there.
So I've added a 3rd channel.
Yeah, how would you get some audio to that output? By default, it doesn't go there.
Right. What I was thinking is maybe I can think of the 3rd channel as something that I want to send all of the sound from the left and the right channel of the audio file into. So I could say, send it in with 0 changes from the left and the right into channel 3 of my Q outputs.
Yeah. Maybe that's a sub, and you just want to get all of the bass frequencies from both channels out to that sub or something like that.
Love that.
Yeah. So now you've routed your left and right out to this extra Q output. We'll do a little quiz as we go along. If we wanted to switch which Q outputs our left and right channel we're going to, how would we do that?
I would change it so that it sent 0 changes to channel 2 from the left channel instead of the right channel. So I would make this blank.
Deleting that.
Set this to 0.
Delete
make
that.
this blank. Set this to 0.
So now you've flip-flopped which Q or which output is getting which channel. Love it.
Love it.
So this now has routed our channels of our file to Q outputs of this Q. Now, we've gotten this far. So far, so good. If we had added effects to this Q, let's talk about where those happen.
All right.
For Q, you can add audio effects, and if we look over at that tab, we don't have any at the moment, but we could add one, and we could add, I don't know, what's a good audio effect? Low pass filter, just let those low frequencies through. Where this gets applied, if we go back to the Levels tab, you can visualize this as happening at the file channels. This is before any of this routing happens. When we're pulling the audio off the disk, we feed it through those audio effects, and then it gets routed into this matrix.
Does it happen before the gain or after the gain?
It happens before the gain.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
So now we have routed the audio in a queue. We've even added a little effects processing. We now know it goes from the file through the effects, through this routing matrix, and now where is the audio? How is it getting to the speaker? The next step in this journey is the patch. A queue is assigned to a patch, which is the way that QLab knows how it is actually hooked up to hardware, to actual speakers. In the I/O tab of this queue, we have assigned it to, it has by default an audio patch. When a QLab workspace is created, it creates some nice patches for us by default so that we have something to work with. It looks for what devices are on our computer and just makes one for each of those. We can delete or add them as we please. So this one was assigned to our main audio patch. And we can go look at that patch to figure out where the audio goes from here. Once it is played out of this queue, what happens next? And we'll go press this edit button. It brings up the patch window. And this is the remainder of the audio signal flow happens in this window. And the first thing that happens is we've got our Q outputs. We talked about how we routed the Q, the individual file channels, to the Q outputs. Well, here are our Q outputs again. So this is for all Qs that are assigned to this patch. You can think of the audio that's flowing out of the queues into these Q output parts of the patch. It's sort of like the input of the patch.
Yep.
We can name these. This would be a handy place to name outputs that might correspond to a specific speaker. If you want to be able to look at the Q levels tab and say, okay, Q output number 10, which one is that? Oh, that's my upstage right speaker, or something like that.
So in our simple setup, before we were doing left, right, and sub, maybe we could give these Q outputs those names.
Sure,
just
great.
to see.
Yeah.
We reverse left and right, so I'm just gonna take advantage of that and make channel 1. I suppose that's a little confusing. We'll fix it in the levels tab.
Yeah, we decided intentionally to flip it in the queue, but in real life, our speakers were left, right, and maybe we've got a sub here.
Okay, so I've updated those Q outputs.
And if we look back at the levels tab of the queue, we'll see that those show up there. So now I can see that as reference point when I can say, and now I can more easily see, oh, my left is actually routed to my right, so let's flip it back. So now it's back to what I expect.
All right, so left to left, right to right, and then
everything
to sub.
To the sub. Love it.
Great. Back to the patch.
Back to the patch. So here at this point is another opportunity to add audio effects. We can do them 1 or 2 channels at a time. You can, different effects support different numbers of channels of input and output. Most effects support either 1 or 2. Some effects require one or the other, so there are some effects that don't work if you just give them 1 channel. Like they have to have 2 channels.
Okay.
So if an effect doesn't seem to be happy and you've tried to assign it to a 1 channel slot, then maybe check to see if it wants 2 channels of input.
All right.
But we can add more effects here. We don't need to do it, but anything that would flow through right now, we have this all set up that it's a 1 channel at a time. So anything that's going out Q output number 1, which we've labeled left, could have a 1 channel effect assigned to it. Might add some delay, we might, whatever we want to put on there. And then we're getting so close to the actual speakers. We're not quite there yet, but we're so close. So we're pulling the audio out of the queue itself. We apply some global effects to all queues that are going out this patch. And now we're going to route it to the hardware. And here we have the final matrix router. This is the global routing for this patch. And what device is this assigned to? Our big audio device. It's an 8 output device. So we have a maximum number of actual 8 outputs for this physical piece of hardware. So it shows us 8 sliders along the top. Those are our outputs again. And yes.
Yeah, if we change the audio device temporarily to show you what changes, our iMac speakers have only 2 outputs. So if we change it to that, you see that our crosspoints now only have 2 outputs on the top here.
Yeah. So you should see as many sliders on the top of this matrix as you have physical outputs on your device, up to a maximum at the present time of 64. And your inputs are from your cues. So now, if we scroll down, we'll see that we have up to, once again, 64 inputs on the patch, because those are the outputs from the cues. So our hardware has 8 outputs here, which means that we have 64 inputs from the cues can be routed to as many as 8 separate outputs of this piece of hardware. The same kind of routing applies. Right now we have every left or channel 1 output of a cue is going to the number 1 channel of this piece of hardware. And hopefully that channel is hooked up to our left speaker because that's what we've labeled it as. We'd get very confused if we'd sent it somewhere else. And so on down the line. It looks like, in our imaginary scenario here, maybe we only have 3 speakers connected to this 8-channel device.
Right.
So we have a 1-to-1 routing of left goes to one output, right goes to one output, and our sub goes to one output. And we're almost done. There's one last place that we can modify the audio flowing through the system. That's our device outputs. Same deal, you can apply effects, and now this is after the matrix routing. On the final step on the way towards the hardware, towards the speakers, you can add effects to any individual 1 or 2 channel pairings on the piece of hardware. And now we've gotten from the file out to the actual hardware speakers. What else do we want to say about that? That was for an audio cue. Audio cues have their own set of audio patches. Who else can use audio output patches?
Currently in QLab, the mic cue can use audio output patches along with audio input patches, the camera cue, and video cues.
So all 4 kinds of cues can use audio output patches because they all can generate audio. So
Exactly.
you can define as many audio patches as you want, and all of the cues that can send out audio can use any individual one of those.
Exactly right.
You said with the mic cue, those also have audio input patches.
Yes.
Tell me about those.
An audio input patch is more simple than an audio output patch. If you take a look here, you can define how many channels you're pulling from your audio input patch. So if you have one microphone that you're using and you want to get audio from just one channel of your input device, then if I go into the Levels tab, you'll see that there's only one input. When we were looking at the audio cue, there were 2 inputs in the Levels tab because the file itself had 2 channels. But in the case of the mic cue, the number of channels gets defined by what you've selected in the I/O tab.
Okay.
It's limited also by the number of channels available on your audio device. Something I wanted to talk about briefly is maybe just a very quick run through, starting now in the mic cue, just very quickly from input to output, step by step, just as a reminder.
Yeah, great.
So, input, 1 channel from the microphone, goes through your audio effects, then goes through an input gain, goes to this crosspoints mixer into cue outputs of your patch. Then inside your patch, which I'm going to get to using the I/O tab, goes into cue output effects. And from cue output effects goes into patch routing. And from patch routing goes into a device effect. And from a device effect, it goes out to your audio device.
To here on our beautiful system.
Beautiful system.
For this mic cue, I noticed in the Levels tab that it started out with silent main volume, which is a little bit of a, could trick you if you're expecting it to make sound by default. But in our default cue templates, mic cues start out silent because we want you to be real careful about being sure you want to hear the audio input at a specific level. So they start out silent. You can adjust that in the cue template if you want them to start out at some other volume, but you would have to, by default, change that volume level to actually hear anything for mic cue.
Yes, and this is in response to gotchas from many customers who start out working on their QLab workspaces on their laptops, run a mic cue, and if their main volume was set high, they could create feedback between their computer speakers and their microphone, and it was very unpleasant. And so we decided to make that less likely by default.
Yeah. I think that's mostly it.
I think that's the audio signal path.
Shall we take just a quick look at the list of patches to see what those look like in the settings?
I would love that.
We have been going straight to an individual patch through the button in the inspector, but if you open up the settings and go down to, say, the audio settings, this is where you see the list of all the patches that you've created or that QLab has made for you.
So if you want to make another output patch for a different device, you make a new output patch, you select a device from this list, and by default, your patch will map cue output 1 to device output 1, and so on. And no effects on the inputs or outputs. and just a direct line from input to output.
Yeah. And that's it.
I think that's it. I think we did it.
We did it. We did it. Cheers.
Cheers.
Audio signals.
Thanks for visiting QLab TV. Hope you learned something.